She was gone for 3 hours before he admitted to himself that the penthouse felt wrong without her. Not empty. It was immaculate as always, every surface ordered, every room exactly as it should be. But wrong in a way that had nothing to do with furniture or lighting or the view of the Han River that had never bothered him before tonight. He sat at his desk with an open intelligence report and read the same paragraph 4 times. He closed the file. He had spent 20 years building a life that needed nothing and no one. He had been proud of that. He had called it discipline. He had called it strength. And then a woman from Durban with wild curly hair and zero interest in shrinking herself had walked into his penthouse, refused to disappear into the background, and completely dismantled everything he thought he knew about himself. And now she was on a plane. And Seoul, the city he controlled, the city that feared his name, felt like a place he didn't particularly want to be anymore. He picked up his phone, put it down, picked it up again, called his personal assistant. Book me a flight to Durban. First available. Welcome to Afro-K Romance Fairy Tale. On today's episode we are back with Park Joon-ho and Rejoice Dlamini. And if you watched part 1 you already know that what started as a forbidden attraction inside a Seoul penthouse has become something neither of them has any map for. If you missed part 1, here is what you need to know. Joon-ho is the most feared man in Seoul's criminal world. Cold, controlled, untouchable. Rejoice came from Durban, South Africa, took a housekeeping position in his penthouse, and refused from day 1 to make herself invisible. One unguarded Tuesday morning cracked 20 years of discipline wide open. By the end of part 1 they were standing in the middle of his penthouse holding each other. No titles, no distance, no pretending anymore. Today everything gets bigger. The romance gets deeper. The danger gets real. And Durban is about to change both of them in ways Seoul never could. If you are new here, make sure to like, subscribe, click the notification bell and tell me in the comments which city you are watching from. Now let's go. 3 weeks after that penthouse moment, nothing between them had been formally named. There was no conversation that began with definitions or declarations. That was not who either of them was. What existed instead was something quieter and more certain than words. The way he came home earlier without explaining why, the way she always knew when he hadn't eaten, the way their mornings had developed a rhythm that belonged only to them. He had read 2 more of her book recommendations. She had learned how he took his coffee without being told. He had started leaving the study door open when he worked. She had stopped calling him Mr. Park entirely. It was not nothing. They both knew it was not nothing. But the world they lived in had not changed around them. His name still carried weight that crushed ordinary things. Her position still existed inside the boundaries of his household, and the invisible architecture of everything that made them complicated had not disappeared just because Sunday mornings had become sacred. So they lived in the in-between, warm and unspoken and deliberately unnamed. Then her phone rang at 2 in the morning. She was in the kitchen getting water when it happened. He heard it from his study. Heard the way her voice changed in the first 10 seconds of the call, that specific tightening that happens when something serious arrives without warning. He was in the kitchen doorway before he had decided to move. She was already sitting down. Phone pressed to her ear. Her free hand flat on the marble counter, steadying herself. He waited. When she hung up she sat very still for a moment. Then she looked up at him. My mother is in hospital. It's serious. He didn't ask questions. When do you want to leave? She blinked. She had been bracing for logistics. Notice period, replacement arrangements, the professional choreography of an employee requesting emergency leave. She had not been bracing for that. I'll book a flight in the morning, she said carefully. Tonight, he said. I'll have it arranged in an hour. She looked at him for a long moment. Joon-ho, your mother is in hospital, he said simply. Tonight. She didn't argue. She went to pack. He stood in the kitchen alone after she left the room and did something he had not done in a very long time. He exhaled slowly and let himself feel the full weight of what was sitting in his chest. Not strategy. Not analysis. Just the simple, terrifying fact that he was about to watch her walk out of his life. Temporarily, logically, completely reasonably. And every part of him was already protesting. He arranged the flight. He arranged a car. He stood at the elevator at 4 in the morning with her bags already loaded and watched her come toward him dressed for travel. No uniform, no professional composure, just Rejoice. Tired and worried and real. She stopped in front of him. Thank you. For the flight. Don't thank me, he said quietly. She looked at him. He looked back. All the things neither of them had named sitting loudly in the space between them. Then she stepped into the elevator. The doors closed. He stood in the foyer for a long time. She landed in Durban at dawn. The city received her the way it always did, with heat and color and the particular smell of home that hits you in the chest before you have even left the airport. She took a taxi straight to the hospital. Her mother was stable. A cardiac episode, serious but manageable, the doctors said. Her younger brother Saifo was already there, wide-eyed with relief when she walked through the door. She sat beside her mother's bed and held her hand and let herself breathe for the first time in hours. Her mother looked at her for a long time. Then in Zulu she said, "You look different." Rejoice kept her eyes forward. "I'm tired, Mama. I just flew through the night." Her mother smiled. The particular smile of a woman who has raised a daughter and knows every version of her face. "Not tired," she said softly. "Different." Rejoice said nothing. But her mother was not wrong. Back in Seoul, Park Joon-ho lasted exactly 41 hours. 41 hours of intelligence reports he couldn't focus on. 41 hours of a perfectly ordered penthouse that had somehow become evidence of everything missing from his life. 41 hours of picking up his phone and putting it down and telling himself that a man like him did not follow a woman across continents because the apartment felt quiet. On the 42nd hour he called his personal assistant again. "That flight to Durban. Book it now." Durban received Park Joon-ho like a question he didn't know how to answer. He stepped out of the car on a bright Wednesday morning and stood on the street for a moment. Just standing, just absorbing. The heat was immediate and unapologetic. The neighborhood was alive in a way Seoul never was at this hour. Children somewhere nearby, music from a radio through an open window, the smell of something cooking that reminded him of the breakfast she used to make. He had the address. He had memorized it 7 weeks ago during a Sunday morning conversation. She didn't know he was filing away permanently. He found the house on a quiet residential street in Umlotsi. Modest, warm. A small garden with flowers that someone tended carefully. Low fence. A gate that was open. He was standing outside it when she came around the corner carrying groceries. She saw him and stopped walking completely. The groceries in both hands. The Durban sun behind him. And Park Joon-ho. No suit today. Dark-fitted trousers and a simple black shirt, looking simultaneously out of place and completely certain. Standing outside her mother's gate like he had not just crossed an entire ocean without being invited. She stared at him. He looked back at her. "What are you doing here?" Her voice was quiet. Not angry. Just genuinely unable to process the geometry of this moment. "You left," he said. "I had a reason to leave." "I know," he said. "I came anyway." She stood there for another full second. Then she exhaled. Something between exasperation and something much warmer that she wasn't ready to name out loud. She walked past him through the gate. "Come inside before the neighbors make it a whole event." He followed her in. The next 6 days were the most disorienting and quietly beautiful of Park Joon-ho's adult life. Rejoice's mother, Mrs. Dlamini, home from hospital by Thursday, moving slower than usual but sharp as ever, assessed him from her armchair in the sitting room with the same precise eyes her daughter had inherited. She said very little in English. She watched everything. Her youngest brother Saifo, 22 years old, engineering student, absolutely unbothered by the reputation of the most powerful man in Seoul's criminal underworld, sat across from Joon-ho at the dinner table on the first night and asked him directly, "What exactly are your intentions with my sister?" Rejoice closed her eyes briefly from across the table. Joon-ho looked at Saifo without flinching. "Serious ones," he said. Saifo studied him for a long moment. Then he nodded once and went back to his food. "All right then. You can pass the rice." That was the interview. Apparently he passed. What followed was something Joon-ho had no category for. He cooked in Mrs. Dlamini's kitchen, badly, enthusiastically, under Rejoice's instruction, and produced something that was technically edible and emotionally very far from what she had asked for. She stood beside him laughing with her whole body, the kind of laugh that had no performance in it, and he stood there watching her and thought, This is what I came for. He walked the Durban beachfront with her at sunset, shoes off because she insisted, the Indian Ocean stretching endlessly in front of them. He had stood at the water's edge for a long time without speaking, just listening to something that vast and indifferent and ancient. She had stood beside him watching his face instead of the water. "First time?" she asked. "First time," he said. She nodded, looked back at the ocean. "It does that to everyone. Makes everything feel smaller." "Not everything," he said quietly. She felt his hand find hers in the fading light. She didn't pull away. They stood there until the sun was gone and the water turned dark, and the city behind them lit up warm and alive and completely unaware of the two of them standing at its edge deciding something without saying a word. On the fifth evening, Mrs. Dlamini called Junho to sit beside her. Rejoice translated, hovering nearby, pretending she wasn't holding her breath. The old woman took his hand in both of hers, looked at him steadily, spoke slowly in Zulu. Rejoice translated quietly, voice careful and neutral. She says, "I have watched you for 5 days. You do not try to own her. You do not try to manage her. You just stay close." She says that is the rarest thing a powerful man can do. Junho said nothing. He held the old woman's gaze. Mrs. Dlamini spoke again. Rejoice paused before translating. Her voice when it came was slightly less steady than before. She says, "Love her loudly or not at all. She has spent enough of her life being somebody's quiet secret." The room was completely still. Junho looked across at Rejoice. She was looking at the floor, jaw tight, eyes bright, pretending to be very interested in the carpet pattern. "Tell her," he said quietly, "that I have no intention of being quiet about anything anymore." Rejoice translated. Her mother smiled, squeezed his hand once. "Let it go." Later that night, Rejoice came to find him on the back porch where he was sitting alone in the dark. She sat beside him without explanation. They stayed like that for a long time, the warm Durban night around them, the sound of the neighborhood settling into sleep. "She likes you," Rejoice said finally. "She's terrifying," he said. "Yes," Rejoice agreed. "That's where I get it from." He turned to look at her in the dark. She was already looking at him. And in that moment, no penthouse, no organization, no weight of either of their worlds. He leaned forward and kissed her, slow and certain and completely decided. Her hand came up to his jaw. Neither of them rushed it. The Durban night stayed warm around them and asked no questions. The seventh morning he stepped outside for an operations call with Sol. It was early. She was still asleep. The street was quiet. He was on the phone for 40 minutes, the Chongryong business running smoothly. His lieutenants reporting in, the ordinary machinery of his life continuing without him. He ended the call, turned back toward the house, walked into the kitchen. The groceries were still on the counter where she had been unpacking them. Her phone was face up on the table. She was not there. He stood completely still for 4 seconds. The same 4 seconds he had stood in that Seoul doorway months ago. But this was nothing like that morning. That morning had been shock wrapped in wonder. This was something else entirely. He picked up her phone, looked at it, set it back down. Then he made the first call. He made 3 calls in 8 minutes. First call, his head of security in Seoul. Voice completely flat, completely controlled. "She's missing. Durban, South Africa. Activate the full team." Second call. His 2 most trusted field operatives. "I need you on the next flight to Durban. I'll send the address in 60 seconds. Third call. A local Durban contact he had never needed until this moment but had kept in his network for exactly the kind of situation that was never supposed to happen. 8 minutes. 3 calls. The machine was running. He stood in the kitchen and looked at her phone on the table. Looked at the groceries still half unpacked on the counter. Looked at the warm ordinary kitchen of the woman who had rebuilt something in him he hadn't known was broken. Then he sat down. Because his legs had made that decision without consulting him. Mrs. Dlamini appeared in the kitchen doorway. She had heard the urgency in his voice through the walls even without understanding the language. She looked at him, looked at the empty kitchen, and understood immediately in the way mothers always understand things before they are explained. She sat across from him, She did not panic. She folded her hands on the table and began to pray, low and steady and completely unshakable. The sound of it filled the kitchen like something solid. Saifo appeared minutes later. Junho told him quickly and directly. The young man's face went tight with fear before he locked it down. The same way his sister locked things down, Junho noticed. Same jaw. The same eyes that kept functioning even when everything inside was breaking. What do you need? Saifo asked. Information. Anyone who came to this street in the last 2 hours that didn't belong here. Talk to the neighbors. Now. Saifo left immediately. Junho looked at the table. His hands were flat on the surface. He noticed, with the detached clarity of a man trained to observe everything, that they were not entirely steady. He pressed them flatter. Breathe. Mrs. Dlamini finished her prayer. She looked up at him and spoke quietly. Her English, rarely used, came out slow and deliberate. She is strong, the old woman said. Stronger than anybody know. You find her. She is already fighting. He looked at her. Something in his chest that had been locked for 20 years cracked a little further open. I know, he said. I know she is. He stood up, got back to work. 2 hours and 19 minutes. That was how long it took. His field operatives landed and moved fast. Junho's network in Durban, limited but precise, had already identified a vehicle, a direction, a property 40 minutes outside the city. Private. Isolated. The kind of location chosen by people who knew what they were doing. Seo Hyunjae knew exactly what he was doing. The Seo syndicate had been watching Chongryong for 18 months. Patient, methodical, building a case to dismantle Junho's legitimate business front from the inside. They had tried financial pressure. They had tried political leverage. Nothing had found a crack in the armor. Then Junho had cleared a Sunday. And somebody had noticed. Seo Hyunjae was 50 years old, silver-haired. The kind of calm that came from never making a move without already knowing the next 3. He had identified Rejoice not as a target but as a key. The right pressure applied to the right person would force Junho into a reactive move. Emotional, unstrategic, exposing. One mistake from the most controlled man in Seoul's underworld was all he needed. What he had not accounted for, what nobody ever accounted for, was Rejoice herself. She had been taken cleanly. 2 men, a vehicle, professional and fast. She had not fought, she was too intelligent for that. She assessed the situation in the first 60 seconds and understood that physical resistance was not her tool here. Her tools were observation and patience and the ability to read people with terrifying precision. The room they kept her in was clean. 2 operatives. 3rd one outside. Seo Hyunjae's operation was professional. No unnecessary aggression, no threats beyond the implicit. Just waiting. Holding her until the phone call was made and the demand delivered. She focused on the youngest operative in the room. Early 20s. He wouldn't meet her eyes. His hands moved too much, adjusting his jacket, checking his phone, shifting his weight. A man who had agreed to something that felt different now that he was inside it. She started quietly. Not pleading, she would not plead. Just human. How long have you been doing this? She asked him. He didn't answer. Because you don't look like someone who does this, she said. No accusation. Just an observation. Like she was simply describing what she saw. He looked at the floor. I'm not trying to escape, she said calmly. I just want to talk. There's a difference between a person and a job. I'm a person. You know that already. That's why you won't look at me. The older operative across the room told him sharply to ignore her. He tried. He couldn't. Over the next hour she worked that crack with the quiet precision of a woman who had spent her life navigating spaces that were not built for her. By the time the 2nd hour arrived, the young operative was sitting 3 feet closer than his instructions required. The internal communication had slowed, and the clean professional operation had developed the specific friction that comes when one person inside it starts asking themselves the wrong questions. She didn't need to escape. She just needed to slow everything down until the door opened. Junho came through that door first. Dark shirt. Sleeves pushed up. No suit. He had not thought about a suit once in the past 2 hours and 19 minutes. His jaw was set in a way none of his Seoul lieutenants would have recognized because it was not the jaw of a man executing a strategy. It was the jaw of a man who had spent 139 minutes in a warm Durban kitchen with unsteady hands and a prayer playing in the background, and the specific terror of someone who has only recently understood what they cannot afford to lose. His eyes found her immediately across the room. She was sitting upright on a chair against the far wall, back straight, expression steady, unhurt. She met his eyes, gave him one small nod. "I'm all right." He crossed the room, stopped in front of her. His eyes moved across her face, checking, confirming, making sure with the thoroughness of a man who needed to see it for himself before he could believe it. Then he pulled her into his arms without a single word. No strategy, no composure, no performance for the operatives in the room or the lieutenants behind him, or the 20 years of carefully constructed untouchability that had defined every move he had ever made. Just his arms around her, his jaw against her temple, every wall completely gone. She gripped the back of his jacket with both hands, pressed her forehead into his neck. Every minute of the past 2 hours and 19 minutes, the steadiness she had held, the patience, the performance of calm she had maintained entirely alone, dissolved completely in the one place she had quietly decided was safe. They stayed like that longer than either of them planned. Nobody in the room made a sound. Now, before we get to the final part of today's episode, one need to stop right here and ask you something important, because if you have made it this far, you are exactly the kind of viewer this channel was built for. Did you feel that reunion? Because that moment, no words, just arms, that is what real emotional storytelling is supposed to do to you. And there is so much more coming in part 4. But first, if you are watching this and you are not yet subscribed, I need you to do that right now. Click that subscribe button and turn on your notifications, because the finale of this episode is coming, and after that there is an entire part 3 of this story already in the works. And trust me, what Madam Park does when she lands in Durban and what Seo Hyunjae does next will have you completely speechless. Drop in the comments right now. Whose side are you on? Team Rejoice, a woman who held herself together alone in that room like the absolute queen she is. Or Team Junho, a man who crossed an ocean and showed up at a gate with nothing but certainty. Tell me. And tell me which city you are watching from, because I read every single comment. Now let's finish this story. They drove back to Durban in near silence. Rejoice sat beside him in the back of the car, her shoulder against his hand holding hers on the seat between them. Not talking, just present. The Durban landscape moving past the windows, golden and unhurried and completely indifferent to everything that had just happened. His operatives were in the vehicle ahead. The situation was contained. Seo Hyunjae's operation had been dismantled at the location cleanly and without noise. The man himself had not been present, too calculated for that. He never put himself in the room. But his operatives were handled and his leverage was gone, and Park Junho was already 3 moves ahead of whatever came next. But right now none of that was what mattered. He looked at her profile in the afternoon light. The straightness of her back even now. The way she was looking out the window with that particular stillness that meant she was processing something privately and completely. "You held it together in there," he said quietly. "I had to," she said. "You didn't have to. Most people wouldn't have." She turned to look at him. "I'm not most people." "No," he said. "You're not." She looked at him for a moment longer. Then she turned back to the window. But her hand tightened slightly around his. He felt it. Said nothing, just held on. Mrs. Dlamini was standing at the gate when the car pulled up. She had not sat down once in 2 hours and 19 minutes. Saifo had tried. She had ignored him completely and stood at that gate with her hands folded and her eyes on the street and her faith entirely unshaken. When Rejoice stepped out of the car, the old woman moved faster than anyone had seen her move since the hospital. She crossed the small garden and took her daughter's face in both hands and looked at her. Just looked for a long silent moment, and then pulled her close and held her with the particular ferocity of a mother who has already decided she is never letting go. Rejoice closed her eyes, held her back just as hard. Junho stood beside the car and watched. Something moved through his expression that he didn't try to manage or contain. He thought about his own mother, the lunch, the careful diplomatic language, the hand on his across the table that was love wrapped in strategy. He thought about the difference between love that protects itself and love that simply opens its arms at the gate and holds on. Saifo appeared beside him, stood there for a moment. She's okay, he asked. She's okay, Junho said. Saifo nodded, exhaled slowly. Then, you went through a door first. Yes. Good, Saifo said simply, and went inside. That night the house was quieter than it had been all week. Mrs. Dlamini went to bed early, exhausted in a way she wouldn't admit. Saifo disappeared to his room. The house settled into its nighttime sounds around them, and Junho found Rejoice on the back porch again. The same place they had sat 5 nights ago, when the biggest thing between them was an unspoken feeling and a Durban night asking no questions. Everything was different now. And somehow they were back here anyway. She had a cup of tea. He sat beside her. The warm night around them. The neighborhood quiet. After a long time she spoke. I was afraid, she said. Not looking at him. Looking at the dark garden. Not of them. I want you to be clear about that. I was never afraid of them. I know, he said. I was afraid of what it meant. She turned the cup in her hands. That they used me. That I had built this whole life. This careful, deliberate, independent life. And in one afternoon it became somebody else's weapon. She paused. I was afraid that loving you costs something I didn't agree to pay. The honesty of it landed without softening. He didn't try to argue it away or reassure her past it. He sat with it the way she had taught him to sit with things. Fully, without reaching for the exit. You're right, he said. It does cost something. I won't tell you it doesn't. She looked at him. Being close to me has a price, he said. I have known that my whole life, and I have kept people at a distance because of it. Deliberately. Completely. He looked at her directly. And then you came and made distance impossible, and I chose. I chose not to rebuild it. That choice has consequences. Today was one of them. So what do we do with that? She asked quietly. I keep you safe, he said. Not by keeping you away from my world. By making sure my world understands that you are not a pressure point. You are not leverage. You are not a weakness I can be threatened through. His voice was low and completely certain. I handled Tae-sung. I will handle Seo. I will handle every single person who looks at you and sees a way to get to me. That is not a promise I am making lightly. She was quiet for a long moment. And what am I to you while you're doing all that handling? She asked. What is the word for what I am? He looked at her. The warm Durban night between them. The garden dark and still. Everything quiet enough that the only things that existed were this porch and this woman, and the answer he had been carrying for months without finding the right moment to put down. Mine, he said quietly. If you'll have that. She held his gaze for a long time. Long enough that he felt the full weight of waiting. Something he had never had to practice before her. Then, I'm not moving to Seoul to be someone's quiet arrangement. You won't be, he said. I don't do quiet anymore. Not about you. And your mother. My mother will adjust, he said. She always does. The corner of her mouth moved. Not quite a smile. Something more complicated and more real than a smile. Junho, she said. Yes. You came to Durban without being invited. Yes. You memorized my mother's address from a conversation I had 7 weeks ago. Yes. You came through that door first. Always, he said. She looked at him for one more moment. Then she set her tea down, leaned across the small space between them and kissed him, slow and warm and completely decided. His hand came up to her face the way it had in the penthouse study months ago, that same extraordinary gentleness that still surprised her every time, that a man built entirely from control could touch her like she was the most careful thing he had ever held. When she pulled back, she rested her forehead against his. Both of them still. The Durban night warm and patient around them. Okay, she said softly. Okay, he said. They stayed in Durban 3 more days. 3 more mornings in her mother's kitchen. 3 more evenings on the beachfront. One afternoon where Saifo took Junho to watch a local football match, and the most feared man in Seoul's underworld sat in plastic stands, eating a meat pie and cheering for a team he had never heard of 2 hours ago because Saifo told him to, and Rejoice laughed so hard from the row behind them that the people around them turned to look. He filed every moment away. All of it. The heat and the color and the noise of a city that felt everything loudly. The way her world was built from warmth instead of power. The way she moved through it, belonging to it completely, carrying it with her even in Seoul, even in his penthouse, even in rooms that had never been designed for her. He understood now why she had never made herself small. She had never needed to. She was already complete. On the last morning before the flight back to Seoul, Mrs. Dlamini called him to her chair one final time. She spoke in Zulu. Rejoice stood in the doorway translating, arms folded, expression carefully neutral. She says, "You came a long way for something that was never supposed to be possible." She says in her experience those are always the things most worth fighting for. Rejoice paused. Her voice when it continued was quieter. She says, "Bring her home sometimes. This house has enough room." Junho looked at the old woman. Then across at Rejoice in the doorway. Arms folded, jaw tight, eyes bright and refusing to spill. "Tell her," he said, "that I will bring her home as often as she'll let me." Mrs. Dlamini smiled. The full, unguarded, completely satisfied smile of a woman who asked one question and got the only answer that mattered. Seoul was waiting when they landed. Cold and precise and exactly as they had left it. The penthouse immaculate. The Han River below. The city moving like the machine it had always been. But something had shifted in its architecture. Invisible, irreversible. The penthouse that had felt hollow for 41 hours felt different now with her moving through it beside him. Not his space that she occupied carefully. In the way that things become theirs when two people stop pretending. He had 3 urgent meetings waiting. She had calls to make about her mother's ongoing care. They parted in the foyer with the easy rhythm of people who know they will find each other again in a few hours without needing to say so. She was halfway down the hallway when he said her name. He turned. "I meant what I said on the porch," he said. She looked at him for a moment. "I know you did. I need you to know I meant it in Seoul too. Not just in Durban." She held his gaze. Then she smiled, full and warm and completely unguarded. The smile that had undone him in a kitchen months ago and had been undoing him ever since. "I know," she said. "Junho." She turned and walked down the hallway. He watched her go. Then he went to his first meeting. Composed, controlled, completely present. Except for the fact that for the first time in 20 years Park Junho walked into a room full of powerful men and the most important thing in his life was not in it. And he was completely at peace with that. Some people spend their whole lives building walls high enough that nothing can reach them. And some people, if they are extraordinarily lucky, meet someone who makes the walls feel like the loneliest thing they ever built. Park Junho had survived assassinations, betrayals, and 20 years of a world designed to harden everything it touched. It took a woman from Durban with wild curly hair, a full laugh and absolutely no interest in shrinking herself to show him what all that surviving had been missing. And Rejoice Dlamini, who came to Seoul with a plan, a timeline, and strict professional boundaries, found out that the most carefully built lives have a way of becoming something better than what you planned when you stop being afraid of what you didn't plan for. This is not a story about a powerful man and the woman who changed him. It is a story about 2 people who were already whole, who chose each other anyway, loudly, deliberately, without apology. And that, in any language, in any city, on any continent, is the rarest kind of love there is. Now before you go, I need to ask you the questions I know you have already been asking yourself through this entire episode. Was Rejoice right to stay, knowing that loving him makes her a target in a world she never signed up for? Or is a love this deliberate, this chosen, worth every cost that comes with it? And what about Junho? Is a man truly changed when he says the right words? Or does change only count when it shows up in the moments that are hardest? Tell me in the comments. I want to know exactly where you stand. If this story moved you, and I believe it did, please like this video right now, share it with someone who deserves a good love story today, and subscribe if you haven't already because part 3 of this story is coming and what happens when Madam Park lands in Durban, what Seo Hyunjae does next, and what Rejoice discovers about her own visa situation back in Seoul will change everything you think you know about where this story is going. New episodes every week. I will see you in the next one.